My name is Elena Marsh. I was 27 when I finally understood what silence costs a person and what it gives back. The dining room smelled like rosemary and candle wax, the good tablecloth unfolded for the occasion, my sister's engagement dinner. I had ironed my one decent blouse twice, not because I needed to impress anyone, but because some old habit in me still wanted my mother to look at me and see something finished, something arrived. "And this is Elena," my mother said, gesturing at me the way you'd gesture at a coat rack. She's between things right now." Marcus, my sister's fiancé, smiled politely. He had kind eyes and the tired posture of someone who worked too much and slept too little. "Between things. Unemployed," my sister Rachel offered, laughing lightly, the way people laugh when they think a joke is harmless. "Elena's been figuring herself out. For a while now." I felt the old, familiar heat climb my neck. Not anger exactly, something quieter and more tired than anger. I had stopped correcting them 2 years ago, the year I left my firm to freelance under a name that wasn't mine, the year I stopped explaining myself to people who had already decided what I was. I said nothing. I passed the potatoes. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being underestimated by people who raised you. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits in your shoulders, in the careful way you hold your fork, in how you laugh a half-second too late at jokes made at your expense. "So, what do you do all day?" Marcus asked, not unkindly. "Just curious, the way strangers are curious." "A little consulting," I said. "Writing, mostly." My father snorted softly into his wine. "Writing," he repeated, like I'd said something charming and small, a hobby practiced by children. I looked at the candle between us, the way the flame bent sideways when someone breathed near it, and I thought about how easy it would be to say the rest, the actual shape of what I did, who I worked with, what my name meant in rooms none of them had ever sat in. I thought about it, and then I let the moment pass, the way I always did, because some truths feel too heavy to hand to people who never asked to carry them gently. Rachel reached over and squeezed my hand. "We're just teasing," she said, and I believed she meant it kindly, the way people mean small cruelties kindly, without ever weighing what they cost. Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying his glass. Then he asked almost absently, "Elena Marsh, that's an unusual full name. You wouldn't happen to write under initials sometimes? E.g. Marsh." The room did not go silent. Nothing dramatic happened, but something in my chest folded over once, quietly, like a page being turned. "Sometimes," I said. He set down his glass slowly. I hadn't always been the sister people apologized for. There was a version of me, years earlier, who sat at a glass desk on the 14th floor of a building downtown, who wore blazers with structured shoulders, who was praised in meetings for being sharp and promising. My parents liked that version of me. She was legible to them. She had a title they could repeat at dinner parties. I left that job on a Tuesday in March, in the kind of quiet, undramatic collapse that doesn't look like collapse from the outside. I wasn't burned out from the work. I was burned out from performing a version of competence that had stopped being mine. What I didn't tell my family, what I decided, somewhere in that gray month, not to explain to anyone, was that I had started writing under a different name almost as an experiment. A way of separating what I made from who I was expected to be. E.G. Marsh began as a private joke, initials borrowed from an aunt I barely remembered, a woman who had also, apparently, been called impractical by people who loved her. The first essay I published under that name was about failure, real failure, not the performed, redeemable kind people like to read about. It found an audience I didn't expect. Then a second piece. Then quietly contracts. Consulting work for companies who wanted someone who understood how people actually made decisions under pressure, not how they were supposed to. I told my mother I did consulting and some writing. She heard. Unemployed, floating, embarrassing. I let her hear that. It was easier than correcting the story every single time, easier than watching her decide, again, that I was exaggerating. There is a specific grief in being unknown by the people who are supposed to know you best. Not hatred, not even resentment most days. Just a long, low ache, like a bruise you've stopped noticing until someone presses it by accident. I built my quiet life carefully, The way you rebuild a house after a fire, slowly, without announcing each board you lay. I told myself it didn't matter whether they knew. I told myself this so often it almost became true. Almost. E.G. Marsh wrote the piece our firm used to restructure our entire onboarding process, Marcus said slowly, looking at me now like he was recalculating something. I read it twice. I quoted it in a board meeting. I didn't know. He stopped himself, glancing at Rachel, then back at me. I didn't know it was you. My mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth. What are you talking about? Elena's essays, Marcus said. On decision fatigue. On institutional silence. There, he searched for the word. Required reading where I work. Rachel laughed, but it came out thin. That can't be the same Elena. I didn't answer right away. I looked at my hands, at the small scar on my left knuckle from a kitchen accident when I was 19, at the version of me that had sat at this same table for years absorbing small diminishments like rain. It's me, I said finally. Quiet. Not triumphant. Just true. The table went still in that particular way rooms go still, when something reorders itself invisibly. My father set his glass down without drinking from it. You never said, my mother said, and there was something almost accusatory in it, as though my silence had been the offense, not the years of being spoken about like I wasn't present. You never asked, I said. Not sharply. Just honestly, the way you'd note the weather. Marcus looked between us, visibly uncomfortable at having become the fault line in a family fracture he hadn't meant to cause. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't mean to. You didn't do anything wrong, I told him and meant it. He had simply asked a real question, the kind no one in my family had bothered with in years. Rachel's face moved through several expressions, confusion, then something like shame, then a defensiveness that looked, for the first time, fragile rather than careless. Why didn't you correct us? All this time, why didn't you just say something? I thought about that question honestly before answering because it deserved honesty. Because I got tired of being believed only when I could prove it, I said. And I wanted to see, eventually, whether you'd ever ask instead of assume. No one had an answer for that. That night, after the dinner ended in a strange, unresolved quiet, I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time before starting the engine. I wasn't proud of the moment the way people are proud in movies, chin lifted, music swelling. I felt something closer to grief. Grief for the years I'd spent letting a false story stand, because the true one felt too vulnerable to offer people who hadn't earned it yet. My phone buzzed. Rachel, can we talk tomorrow? Just us? I stared at the message for a long time. Rachel and I had been close once, before the distance crept in disguised as normal sibling teasing, before unemployed sister became a joke so repeated it calcified into fact. I typed back, yes. I thought about Marcus, too, not romantically, nothing like that, just with a strange gratitude. He had asked a simple, curious question at a dinner table, the kind of question my own family had stopped asking me years ago. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive through confrontation. Sometimes it arrives because someone outside the old story finally asks the right thing. I drove home slowly, past the streetlights blurring gold against the windshield, and I thought about all the small moments I could have corrected people and hadn't. The office parties. The holiday dinners. The years my mother introduced me as still figuring things out, while I quietly built something that mattered to me, on my own terms, unwitnessed. I used to think my silence was weakness. That night, driving home, I understood it differently. My silence had been a kind of self-protection. A wall I built because the people closest to me had shown, repeatedly, that they weren't ready to see me clearly. I hadn't hidden out of shame. I had hidden because I was tired of translating myself for an audience that wouldn't listen. But walls, even protective ones, cost something. They keep out harm, but they also keep out the people who might have loved you rightly, if only they'd been given the chance. I didn't know yet whether my family deserved that chance. I only knew I owed myself the honesty of finding out. Rachel came to my apartment the next afternoon, without makeup, in an old sweatshirt I recognized from college. She looked, for the first time in years, unarmored. I didn't know, she said, sitting at my small kitchen table, turning a mug of tea in her hands without drinking it. About any of it. The writing. The name. I thought you were just Struggling, I finished for her. Directionless. A cautionary tale you could feel superior to. She flinched, but didn't argue. That's not, she stopped. Maybe. Some of that. I'm sorry, Elena. I really am. I let the apology sit in the room for a moment before responding, because apologies deserve weight, not immediate forgiveness, offered out of discomfort. I don't think you were cruel on purpose, I said. I think it was easier to believe the story everyone already agreed on. It's easier to laugh at Unemployed sister than to ask why your actual sister has been building alone for 4 years. Why didn't you tell me?
Just me.
Not the whole table. Me. It was a fair question, and I owed her a real answer. Because I was scared you'd either not believe me or believe me and still not really see me differently, I said. I didn't want to hand you proof and watch you perform surprise for 5 minutes and then go back to the old story out of habit. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Then she said softly, I might have done that. Years ago. I don't know if I'd do that now. That honesty mattered more to me than any apology could have. She wasn't promising a transformation. She was admitting an old truth about herself, which felt, strangely, like the beginning of a new one. I'd like to actually know you, she said. The real version. Not the one I made up because it was convenient. I nodded, throat tight in a way I hadn't expected. I'd like that too. We didn't resolve 4 years of quiet distance in one conversation. Some fractures need more than an afternoon. But something had shifted. Not triumph, not vindication exactly, just the first honest crack of light through a door that had been closed a long time. In the weeks that followed, I thought often about what kind of story I wanted this to become. There was a version where I turned distant cold, made my new visibility into a quiet weapon, reminding my parents, again and again, of what they'd failed to see, savoring their discomfort. Some small, tired part of me was tempted by that. It would have been easy. It might even have felt satisfying briefly. I didn't choose that. I thought about my father's silence at the table, my mother's defensive flush, and instead of using my new leverage to wound them the way their carelessness had wounded me, I chose something slower and, I think, harder. I let them sit with what they'd missed, without rescuing them from the discomfort, but without punishing them for it either. When my mother called, a week later, and asked, carefully, almost shyly, if I'd tell her more about my work, I didn't perform bitterness. I also didn't perform gratitude I didn't feel. I simply told her, plainly, what I did, who I'd become, without editing it down to something smaller and safer for her comfort. I should have asked sooner, she said. Yes, I said. You should have. I didn't soften that truth, but I didn't weaponize it either. There's a difference between honesty and cruelty, and I had spent enough years on the receiving end of careless words to know I didn't want to become fluent in them myself. My father said less. He wasn't a man built for long apologies. But a month later, he forwarded me an article about decision-making in organizations. No note attached except, thought you'd find this interesting. It wasn't an apology, but it was, in its quiet way, an acknowledgement. The first time in years he had reached toward the person I actually was instead of the one he'd assumed. I took it for what it was. Small, imperfect, real. I saw Marcus again at a smaller family gathering, months later, after the initial shock had settled into something more ordinary. I hope I didn't cause trouble, he said, half joking, half genuinely uncertain. You asked an honest question, I told him. That's not trouble. That's just rare. He laughed a little, relieved. For what it's worth, your work actually changed how our team handles conflict internally. I've cited you more than once without knowing you'd mind. I don't mind, I said, and found, to my quiet surprise, that I meant it fully. No old flinch of needing to diminish the compliment. No automatic reflex to make myself smaller in response to being seen. There's a strange kind of healing in being recognized by someone who owes you nothing, who has no old story to defend or dismantle. Marcus hadn't known me as the unemployed sister. He'd only known my work, cleanly, without the years of family narrative distorting it. In some ways, his recognition mattered more than my family's eventual acknowledgement, not because it was more true, but because it had been uncomplicated by history. Rachel caught my eye across the room that evening and smiled, not the practiced, performative smile of the engagement dinner months earlier, but something quieter and more real. We were rebuilding something. Slowly. Imperfectly. But rebuilding. I think often about that dinner table. The candle bending sideways in its own heat. The careless joke. The moment a stranger's simple question undid for years of quiet mischaracterization in the space of a single sentence. I used to think vindication would feel like triumph, loud and satisfying, a door slamming open. It didn't. It felt like a long exhale after holding your breath so long you'd forgotten you were doing it. I didn't need my family to grovel. I didn't need Rachel's shame or my mother's discomfort to last forever, curdling into something bitter I could point to as proof of my own worth. What I needed, it turned out, was simpler and quieter. To stop being unseen, and then to decide, deliberately, what I would do with being seen. I chose patience over punishment, clarity over cruelty. I chose to let the people who loved me imperfectly have a real chance to know me, rather than either performing forgiveness I didn't feel or nursing a grievance that would have cost me more than it cost them. Some nights, I still think about the version of me who sat quietly through years of small diminishments, absorbing them like weather. I don't resent her. She was protecting something fragile, the only way she knew how. But I'm grateful I'm no longer her. Not because I'm louder now, or more triumphant, but because I finally let the truth stand in the room instead of quietly stepping around it. My name is Elena Marsh. I write under other letters sometimes, but I answer, finally, to my own name, fully, at every table I sit at. That, more than anything else, is the quiet justice I was looking for all along. Some truths don't need to be shouted to be heard. They just need a room quiet enough and a moment honest enough to finally land. Elena didn't win that night by proving anyone wrong. She won by finally letting herself be known, on her own terms, in her own time. And maybe that's the real lesson here. The people who underestimate us aren't always cruel. Sometimes they're just comfortable with the story they've already written about who we are. It's on us to decide when and whether to hand them a truer one. If this story stayed with you, you already know what it feels like to be misjudged by the people closest to you. You're not alone in that. If this one hit close to home, hit like and subscribe. These stories go up every week, and you won't want to miss the next one. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been the unemployed sister in your own family? I read every single one of them. And if you're new here, welcome. This channel is for anyone who's ever had to prove their worth quietly, in their own time. See you in the next story.